think tonight we want to talk about new media. And the term itself is fraught with complexity and confusion because new media has meant so many different things over the last 20, 25, 30 years. It meant websites, it meant blogs, it meant social video, it meant social media, AR, VR, AI, whatever. And I think on the panel tonight we have an incredible range of speakers because we come from different places in how we approached content and the stuff we bring to the table. We come from traditional media, whatever that means, broadcast TV, streaming TV. We come from print, we come from websites, we come from social media, we come from the web itself, out of digital itself. Your startup, Butler.atl, was born. So I want to start with maybe you, Kenneth, and tell us about coming from, and I'm air quoting this, a broadcast TV company, which Universal is anything but these days. Coming from that background, do you see new media, this concept of new media, digital media, as an opportunity, a challenge? How do you face that every morning when you go to work?
Actually, people ask that question all the time, but I think now that we have so many streaming outlets, it's created more opportunities for storytellers. So they're not stuck with just the basic broadcasts. They're not stuck with the traditional cable. But now we have the streaming contents, streaming outlets, with your Peacocks and your Netflix and your, even now, another level of Tubi for those filmmakers who create content who never get the opportunity on the higher tiers. So I think overall, in the terms of that, it's presented more opportunities for storytellers to expand their storytelling.
So full disclosure, backstage about 5 minutes ago,
yes.
You and I are sitting behind this screen,
right.
And I said, what are you going to do in Atlanta
right.
here? You said, I'm coming back to Atlanta in a few months.
Right.
I said, I'm going to scout a project called Fight Night.
Right.
And Fight Night, I said, my eyes lit up because I said, Fight Night is a podcast from
right.
iHeartMedia where I work. And maybe just talk about that as a perfect encapsulation of the new world of where ideas come from
yeah.
and where they go, because it's all different now.
Yeah,
so tell that story.
And it's interesting because when we got that TV show and it went through development, it got greenlit, and then part of my job once it's greenlit is I oversee the whole entire project from a physical production perspective, act in a executive producer capacity. I knew iHeart was attached, but didn't know the extent of their attachment. And so it's great knowing that something like this was a podcast story, episodes, and now my job is to bring it to life visually with actors. It's going to move into another way of telling that story, and I think that goes back to even with Sadé and publications and short stories in the magazines come to movies and television shows, as well as, in different radio shows. I mean, it's a great connection.
Yeah.
I thought that was interesting.
I want to jump over to you, Sadé. So you're the Chief Marketing Officer of Time, this just legendary brand and IP. You spent 8 years at Forbes prior to that. Maybe there is no one better on the panel to talk about this evolution from traditional media. Again, I use this word in air quotes because I barely know what it means anymore, but traditional media into new media, into digital media. How do you face work every day knowing I have this legacy that is awesome but got to be overwhelming, and I'm trying to move it lock, stock, and barrel as fast as I can into a whole new audience, content type, platforms? How do you face that?
No, it's a great question. First, thank you, Hope, for having us here. I would say it kind of what you're talking about with Fight Night and how it's an idea and a story that sort of gets a deal sold. I think it's definitely about the idea and leading with the idea versus the platform. There are a couple of examples at Time. Obviously, the print product, the magazine, but there's so many other platforms that we have. So Person of the Year, which we just announced earlier this week, and that actually used to be Man of the Year until 1999, which is kind of crazy.
Give it up.
And so, we actually looked back at who would have been the Woman of the Year.
Oh, wow.
Since, the magazine's founding. And that turned into, P&G looked at that digital series that we did, and they said, we want to turn it into an event. So it's now Women of the Year in Beverly Hills every year in March. Amazon then looked at that and said, we want to turn it into a series. So now that's, coming out in sort of that pivotal moment for women when they knew their sort of life and career trajectory had changed. So I say all that to say the platform changes and evolves, but it's really about the idea and the story that if you can sell it, if you can connect to people, our audiences, and obviously our partners, that's what kind of pushes through.
Definitely more tentacles for an IP to reach out into different places. We call them derivative works sometimes, but they're not really. They're the works themselves. I mean,
exactly.
You come from digital media itself. Butter.atl. I want you to explain it to the group so you get it right. But maybe more than anybody on this panel, you come from that place natively, from digital itself. Your company was never anything else except digital media. When you look at, and we're in a safe space here, you can say what you feel like saying, when you look at big brands that are established and traditional, what do you feel like we are missing? I throw iHeartMedia in that bucket. We're a broadcast radio company with 900 radio stations across all 50 states. We are also evolving into that and a digital media company, but I throw myself in that bucket too, where I'm constantly wanting to hear from digital natives, yeah, but this is what you're missing. What do you think?
Yeah, so Butter ATL was a media company that was really founded to help Atlanta tell its own stories. We like to highlight the people, places, and things that kind of make this city amazing because we really believe that culture is Atlanta's #1 export. There's a saying that Atlanta influences everything. And we really believe that, again, so many things kind of come out of Atlanta and go other places. But for so long, we didn't get to tell our own stories down here. In Atlanta, we love lemon pepper wings, for example, right? And, for so long, you'd have brands that would come from New York, LA, and Chicago and say, they would want us to give us permission to talk about that. They would say, hey, we heard y'all like this down here, so tell us about it. So at Butter, we said, you know what? We know the people that are making culture. We know the people that are doing these things on a day-to-day basis that are actually doing the work in and around the city. We can build a platform that speaks to them authentically because we really understand that culture. And I think that's what I would love to see more of, large brands as they kind of lean into, culture and new media, right, is the idea behind authenticity. The thing I say about culture is our definition of culture at Butter is people like us do things like this. And so when you look around and you connect with other people and you see those threads that tie us all together, right? Even in a city like Atlanta, it's always funny. I love my Falcons. Mm-hmm. They didn't do too well today, or ever.
Or ever.
But what's crazy is when you go to a Falcons game or you go to a Atlanta Hawks game, so often you see so many other jerseys in the stands.
Yeah.
But then there was a moment when Atlanta United was created.
Right.
And that was a moment that gave people that no matter where you were from, we all kind of came together and rallied around and said, this is something that we could all kind of collectively own, right? And so I think when it comes to brands and how they, need to think about just, again, being more, culturally relevant, they need to understand that Drake doesn't make a different album for white people and black people. Right. Drake makes music for people that love music. And I think as brands think about ways that they can connect with new media and culture and people that are making it, they need to be very intentional about bringing the right authentic voices and giving them a platform to get out there and speak their truth because they'll find the others, and that's what this is all about.
When you sit with a brand that you want to do a deal with, when you sit with a client, a potential client, do you find yourself still having to take half of every meeting just to convince them of the power of black culture?
Yeah, it's interesting, right? I think, and I've seen it on both sides. I've worked on the agency side for a while. I've seen it on the other side. And again, what's interesting is, people understand that, culture, black culture, these things, pop culture drives so many different things. And they know it's important to interact with it, but they still, kind of treat it like a science experiment.
Yeah.
And, it's always great when we have those, we have certain brands that we work with, that we have people that are on the inside that are really true advocates that understand. And sometimes they just say, you know what, y'all, just get out the way. You might not understand this, but trust me, it'll kind of work. And I think, given, brands like Butter and, other brands that are influencer brands, the opportunity to just create something that makes sense that is authentic for our platforms is so important because people can sniff it out when you're doing it just for the money. People can sniff it out when you're doing things that aren't authentic to your brand. And so, it's still tough, but what I've seen over the years is it's getting a little bit easier. I just think more than anything else in a city like Atlanta, for some reason, we're still considered to be kind of a second-tier city. You know, for some reason, everybody wants to go spend their money in New York, LA, and Chicago, and then they want to kind of come to Atlanta and Butter too with kind of what's left over.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, I would love it if we could kind of flip that model around a little bit because, you know, there are so many folks in Atlanta that do amazing work. You know, we don't need permission from anybody to make something great happen.
So, yeah, give it up. Could not agree more. So for me, my personal experience with this is I grew up in, like I was telling you backstage, I grew up in Berkeley, California, that at one point, 50, 60 years ago, was a mover of culture, a definer of culture in the United States. To some extent still is today. But I feel like I am now the new mover of culture while living in Atlanta. I've been here 25 years. My kids are from here. And my own education on this was working with a guy named Charlemagne the God, who will be here tomorrow. He works at iHeartMedia, and he approached us at iHeart about 3 years ago, and he said, I love this medium called podcasting. I'm a radio star, but I love podcasting. And I want to launch a podcast company called The Black Effect, because I think podcasting is going to give storytellers a way to tell stories that they don't have. Podcasting might be a good way in for a lot of new creators, and I think audiences are going to like that. And me, being ignorant, said, why The Black Effect? Why do you want to call it that? And he said, well, I'm borrowing a Jay-Z lyric because I believe that black creators and culture has an outsized effect on everything else. Atlanta influences everything. Black Effect influences everything. And it taught me about the effect, oversized effect, of that community of creators. But I still, and I think Charlemagne would echo this, in every meeting I go to pitch a brand on a campaign or to bring them into that network to sponsor it, spend half of the meeting explaining what I just walked through, as opposed to cutting to the chase and saying, it's great content, let's go. So I'll throw back to you for a second. Like, when I tell that story, when I talk about sitting with brands and convincing them that this is worth it, does that resonate with you at all in creating content at Universal?
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, you know, I have been honored to oversee great projects like The Best Man Final Chapters on Peacock. That went under a lot of discussion to move it from a film into a television series. I worked on Moesha. That was about a girl in the inner city. You know, that was about telling a story that constantly having to convince people of our stories and of our dreams. I worked on the last show, Grand Crew. You know, it was like a Black Cheers, they say, but it wasn't. It was just, that's what we do to communicate. So I think in my world, we're constantly having to over-explain us telling our story, whether it's in the narrative format, podcast, digital, or even in magazines. We constantly have to define our stories. And I think with this new media, new possibilities, we're now don't have to explain as much. We're able to give you an idea, have a full background, and have a team to come to the table from the filmmakers, from the writers, and from the people involved in that project.
Sadé, what's your take on that? Is it, to make it simple, like, is it getting better? Or do you feel like, yeah, but slowly? Where's your head at?
I think getting better, I would say, probably, but it's still just as tough, I think. I think, to your point, Brandon, about having people on the inside, I think it's really about the right partners at different brands who can sort of share the vision, because translating why something matters is exhausting. You know, it's very exhausting. And so, yeah, I think we all can relate to that. And so, yeah, it is an unending battle, I do think. But because there are so many other platforms and ways, new ways to engage and new ways in, and for people to be discovered, I think there are just more of us that people can see and sort of interact with and say, oh, I heard, you know, that there are more, you know, sort of touch points, I think, than there have been before. So that helps. But it's still about leadership, just saying, either trust the people who say, this makes sense, just trust me on this, or, you know, taking the time to understand the why and why it makes sense to push it forward. Would you?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think if we're just being honest, we're just amongst friends, right? I think the reality is a lot of people's, 9 to 5 doesn't match their 5 to 9. It's easy to say and talk about culture and the importance of culture in a room, but the reality is if you don't have a diverse set of friends and you don't understand these things that happen in culture and authenticity because you don't do it outside of work or you only talk about it, it's inauthentic. And then the reality is too, and I can tell you this because again, I've seen it on both the agency side and on the creator side, there was a study by MSL in 2021 that said even, creators of color typically get paid 30 to 35% less. So a lot of times when you're a black-owned brand or a creator, you're leaving so much money on the table because a lot of these brands, they want to play the move the food around the plate game. And so I think, that's a big part, again, is needing people on the inside that really understand. And I have some relationships where I had a project I was working on and I was able to call up the CMO and say, look, I don't have time to make 50 decks. Do y'all want to do this project at all?
Absolutely.
And that's what it takes sometimes.
Yeah.
Translating why something matters is exhausting is a perfect is a perfect sentence. I mean, is that, not to be dramatic, is that every day?
Listen to the audience.
I think it's every day for all three of us and other colleagues in other departments. That's constant that battle. I mean, here, I work for a major studio, and I have to battle my budgets when I do the black shows versus other shows are always different. And I have to battle that to get money for us. And I have to stand by my creators and say why they need these things. So why do I need to do that?
I want to hit your company real quick for a sec because you're the CEO of the company, and it's, let me ask it pointedly. Why is it important that a company be 51% black-owned? Why is that important? I believe it's important. I want to elucidate clearly why it is. What does it change about that company inherently that makes it different?
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, I think, we want to know that, especially when things are landing in culture, we want to kind of know the people that are behind the curtain sometimes. And just knowing that, again, you have people that are behind the curtain that hopefully kind of, represent, where you come from and kind of understand different areas, just so that, again, the things that get put out there feel honest and authentic. I was just in Cape Town, South Africa a few weeks ago. And again, people's impressions of America, because what they see on the news is crazy.
Yeah.
Like people literally think we run around with guns here all day long. And I mean, it is a little crazy out there.
Yeah.
But, so that's why it's important, to have people, to have majority ownership. The other part of it is, if we're just being honest, because that's the way the rules are set up.
Yeah.
I mean, if you want to play the game, you have to understand. If you want to be, able to get access to certain funding, that's the trick that you have to play. Is your cap table is extremely important because you want to maintain that ownership, but you also got to get these funds because great content requires a business model.
Right.
And in order for me to help, other creators and give other people, and we have people that work for us both above the line and below the line. It takes a budget to do those kind of things, right? And so again, you have to be able to play the game, not just on the making cool content level, but actually, on spreadsheets in the boardroom and on the executive level as well, if you want to be around and be successful.
Understand the business.
Yeah.
That's it. Yeah.
Great content needs a business model is the second best sentence I've heard in a while. I mean, back to the Black Effect, it was interesting when Charlemagne set that company up. He said two things. He said, I want it to be a separate company from iHeartMedia. We can do a joint venture, but I want it to be a separate venture, and I want to own 51% of this company. And I think a lot of the spirit of that company flowed from that decision. When you think about, Sadé, back to you real quick, when you think about new media, big, broad term that can mean a lot of different things, is it solving some of the problems that we're talking about? Do you feel optimistic about it, the theme of these few days here in Atlanta? Or are you thinking like, I don't know, I feel exhausted? How do you feel about it?
I mean, I think why I love media is that it's a platform that brings a lot of different stakeholders to the table in a way that other, maybe platforms and industries don't. You have the celebrity sort of appeal. You have the business folks, you have, policymakers. Everyone is interested in media.
Yeah.
To some end. Everyone needs media. So I think we have the opportunity to capture the attention of so many more folks and stakeholders in a way that makes me hopeful. we produced something called Impact House this past August, which is all about creating an ecosystem around Black entrepreneurs in Martha's Vineyard. And so we brought philanthropists and wealthy investors and corporate folks and policymakers and then the entrepreneurs themselves, because you can't do it if it's just the entrepreneurs talking to each other, you know, that only goes so far. So how do we bring more folks to the table who can find new businesses to invest in or can figure out what policy changes they can sort of enact? So I think that's what makes me hopeful, is that you can capture the attention of folks in a way that you otherwise may not have. Yeah.
Media is the storytelling of our time.
Correct.
I mean, even on the worst days of work, when I'm frustrated, I'm tired, I'm like, these are the stories we're going to remember in 1,000 years. Yeah. Whether it's an article from Time or a TV show from Universal or a content experience you create.
I think one thing for us, we can probably collective that we're intentional in our storytelling. Yeah. And one reason Charlemagne wanted that 51% because he wanted to be intentional and control the narrative. And that's something we've never really had. And so by Brandon being the CEO, he controls that narrative. It allows us to be intentional.
Sure.
I think that's what's important in our storytelling.
We are coming, I'll just sort of close on this question back for you, Kenneth, but we're on the wave of 20, 25 years of massive disruption in storytelling. Different ways to tell stories coming at us every day. It's our job. We like this job, but it's what we signed up for. And like I said, it used to be broadcast, and now it's AR. Another wave is coming at us called artificial intelligence that is starting right about now, and content will be unrecognizable. The way it's made, the way it's consumed, the way it's distributed. I'll end with just asking you this, just because I think maybe it pertains most to you right now in the world of, you just came off strikes that
yes.
directly were about this.
Yes.
Two-part question. What does it do to the content engine that you're sitting on top of? But also, harder question maybe, does it worry you about diversity and representation? What happens inside an artificial intelligence engine?
Of course it worries you because it's the unknown. And I think when we look at AI in my business, you know, the biggest holdback was that they wanted AI. It's unproven territory, technology. We don't know. Yeah. And so it is a worry to a certain extent, but what I often said is that you can't get the emotion you want in writing, in acting, or even in managing, you know? So at this point, I'm not as worried because they have not totally mastered that. Now, when they've taken over like iRobot, that's a whole different story. But I think right now it's new technology and we get it, but we don't really know what it has not evolved enough just yet. It's still it's still under exploration.
Yeah. Sadé, Brandon, Kenneth, I cannot thank you enough for letting me sit in with you guys and talk about this stuff. I deeply, deeply appreciate it. And thanks you guys for listening.